Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to our second day of the 27th Christmas workshop of the IFT. The first day of online workshop, and it's a pleasure to have with us to start Geraldine Servant from Desi and Hamon University. She's, as you well know, a world expert in BSM and implications for the early universe. So please, Geraldine, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. So it's my pleasure to give this talk today, remotely, unfortunately, but that's the way it is. And I will discuss, so you see the title, Primordial Gravitational Waves Boosted by Axions. And this is the work which appeared recently based on these two papers with my PhD student Pira Simakashorn and my former PhD student Yann Goutenoir, who is now a postdoc in Tel Aviv. And the aim, let me say it already, is to show that early universe axion physics, so the early dynamics of the axions, can naturally induce some non-trivial cosmological history, what I will call a kination era, which is associated with distinctive signatures in gravitational waves. So the main new aspect in this work is that we revisit the usual assumption of a vanishing velocity for the axion. So usually in all the literature on axion cosmology, one assumes the axion is frozen and eventually starts, oscillating when its mass becomes larger than the expansion rate of the universe. But there are actually some well-motivated frameworks where the dynamics is different and the axion initially has a velocity, and this can have really very important consequences and very interesting phenomenology. So that's what I want to discuss. And this is related to some other works I'm doing here with young people at DESY. And I will discuss this towards the end of the talk, related more to axion dark matter. So there are two main sources of gravitational waves. So far, we have only detected gravitational waves from astrophysical sources, from compact objects. And the gravitational waves I will be discussing instead today in this talk are gravitational waves of primordial origin, so produced in the very early universe. We have not yet detected such gravitational waves, but it's a very exciting field because there are very interesting prospects to probe particle physics at very high energy scales. And as you know, gravitational waves, essentially, once they are produced, they do not interact, they propagate freely. Therefore, they do not lose memory of the conditions when they were produced. And so if we are able to detect them today, we would get information about the production mechanism and therefore particle physics at high energy scales that will never be probed by colliders. So the way we discuss these gravitational waves is in terms of their energy density today. So rho gravitational wave is the energy density in gravitational waves compared to the total energy density of the universe. Gravitational waves, they propagate they redshift like radiation. So you have this factor 1/8⁴. And you see from this very simple formula here that if you were able to measure this stochastic background of gravitational waves of primordial origin, you would be able to probe not only particle physics, which is at the origin of these gravitational waves, but also the whole cosmological history through this redshift factor. And this is in fact what I want to stress in this talk. I want to stress the impact of the cosmological history on gravitational waves. The usual assumption is that after inflation, we have this long radiation era. This is this straight line here. However, you may have different stories. In particular, you could have at early times a matter-dominated era, or what I would call a kination era here. And this has very important consequences for the propagation of gravitational waves and the type of signals we would detect today. So we have absolutely no constraint at the moment about the equation of state of the universe at times before BBN. So the usual assumption is this very long radiation era. And I want to question this. So now let's imagine we have different equation of state here at these early times. How can we probe this? That's a key question. And the main way we can probe this is through gravitational waves. Okay, so let me discuss the three canonical examples of gravitational wave backgrounds of primordial origin. So the one which is the most famous is gravitational waves from inflation. And here is this black horizontal line that you see, which is a very conservative assumption, assuming, so just taking into account this so-called irreducible gravitational wave background from the amplification of initial quantum fluctuations of the gravitational field during inflation. You can have more interesting spectra as soon as you take into account the couplings of the inflaton field and you consider reheating or preheating, you can have enhancement and more interesting features in the spectrum. So here, this straight line is the most conservative, I would say, universal model independent signal you would get. The only assumption here is the assumption on the inflationary scale. So I'm taking the highest possible inflationary scale, 10 to the 16. And the amplitude of the signal is very sensitive to this scale. It was like the first power. So as soon as you lower the inflation scale, your signal is becoming even much, much more suppressed than this, okay? So you see, even in the most optimistic case, this is not observable by any of the future planned experiments such as LISA or Einstein telescope. So there is this idea of, this Big Bang observer, which would just barely probe this signal. So that's for the gravitational waves from inflation. Now, another very interesting source are gravitational waves from cosmic strings, and this is this blue spectrum here. So here you need an extra assumption beyond the standard model, which is that there was breaking of some symmetry at early times, which produced this network of cosmic strings. However, this happens in many well-motivated frameworks. And if this happens, it's very interesting because in this case, you have a long-lasting source of gravitational waves because you form these strings, then they form loops, and these loops will keep emitting gravitational waves until today, essentially. So it's a very long source of gravitational waves, and therefore this signal is really spanning the whole cosmological history. So you would get, if you were able to detect such background, you see it spans many decades in frequency, you will have access to the whole cosmological history. And finally, a signal which has been discussed a lot in the last few years is the signal from first order phase transition. So now this is very different in contrast with the two previous sources, because this is now happening at a very given time, a given temperature. So this goes into the category of short lasting source compared to cosmic strings, for instance. And you see it peaks here at a particular frequency, which is the frequency corresponding to the time when the phase transition took place. So by reading the frequency, you can read the temperature at which the phase transition happened. Okay, so these are the main, well-motivated sources of primordial gravitational waves, and there is a lot of literature about this. And the predictions you see here on this plot are assuming that the universe was radiation dominated during production of these gravitational waves. And now I want to question this assumption and see what happens to this spectra when I have a different cosmological history. So first, let me just remind you, I mentioned this peak here, this peak spectrum. And I just wanted to remind you the relation between the frequency we observe today and the temperature of the universe at the time of the phase transition, in this case. And it's just this very simple redshifting formula here. And what is so interesting is that in the case where you plug in the electroweak scale, you find that the frequency is in the millihertz. And this is why we say that LISA is a window on the electroweak scale. Now you can just play with this temperature and you see that you just translate horizontally here your spectrum as soon as you increase the temperature. So for instance, ET will now be a probe of temperature around 10 to the 6, 10 to the 7, 10 to the 8 GeV. Yeah, so this is what I'm showing here. We have now all these interesting future probes. So LISA, as I said, is peaked around, okay, so essentially a window on the weak scale, TeV scale up to 10 TeV. ET and Cosmic Explorer would be windows on the PeV scale, while the PTA, so the pulsar timing arrays, are on the other hand sensitive to gravitational waves produced at the QCD epoch. Okay, so we know QCD phase transition is not first order. However, as soon as you assume the existence of hidden sectors, where you would have some, strong dynamics at the QCD scale in a hidden sector, let's say, you could get signal here. So there is also some activity in this area, given that Nanograph, has claimed to see some signal. Okay, and so now, if we look at this at very high frequencies instead, beyond the kilohertz, there is no way to probe this at the moment. We don't know how to detect, at least there are ideas, there are techniques, but the sensitivity at the moment is way too low to probe interesting physics. But there is a lot of interesting discussions, in particular in the last months, and you may be aware about this white paper, which discuss high frequency gravitational wave detectors. So this is a very interesting area of research and about essentially detection techniques, but also to make the science case for this high frequency gravitational waves. And there are many interesting sources here, because of course these are very high frequencies, even higher energy scales that you could probe.
Can I ask a question before you
yes.
continue? Hello. So this is Belen.
Hi.
Can you give an example, I didn't know about this, of a physical beyond the standard model theory that gives me transition at the QCD scale? Are you thinking of, I don't know, dark...
yeah, exactly, those like dark sector.
The dark sector, for instance, but to explain also dark matter with some confining force, but that the transition is first order or yeah. some model. What is the best model, of that?
Yeah, so there are plenty of models which assume some confining, some strong dynamics in a hidden sector, which would lead to a first order phase transition at this energy scale. So I cannot give you precise examples, but in particular, when there was this paper from Nanograph, this triggered a number of papers.
I have not followed them. Okay, I will look into it.
Okay, I can send you references later if you are
I will
interested.
look for them. We look for them.
Okay.
Don't worry. It was curiosity. Thank you.
Okay, so I just have one slide about gravitational waves from cosmic strings, because as I said, these are very interesting in the sense that they are long-lasting sources. So from the time you form your network, let's say essentially at the gut scale, right, or at the scale of B-L breaking, so at very high energy scales. So you produce these loops, and then they will lose energy by emitting gravitational waves. And you can have different types of features here and high energy cutoff, because in fact, depending on the very microscopic structures you may have in these loops, the so-called cusps and kinks, in this case, you may have emission instead. So the loops, they lose energy in particles instead of emitting gravitational waves. So this is why you may have a cutoff here, which does not correspond to the formation of the network formation cutoff, but really just because initially you lose energy by emitting particles rather than gravitational waves. And here, yes, this is just to show you the part which corresponds to emission in the matter era and or versus emission in radiation era. And so blue is really the total spectrum. So this is the prediction you get by assuming radiation domination. And what is very interesting is that this spectrum can be completely different as soon as you change your cosmological history. And this is what we've been investigating here at DESY over the last couple of years. So in particular, this nearly flat spectrum here is really a consequence of assuming radiation domination. And this can disappear. You can get completely different type of spectrum by assuming a different cosmological history. Okay, so as I advertised in the title, I mean, this talk has something to do about axion physics, so there is a strong connection, and that's what I would like now to explain. I would like to relate this so-called Keynesian era to axion physics. So my title was, gravitational waves boosted by the axion. So the gravitational waves I'm discussing are not gravitational waves produced by axion dynamics itself. It's just that the axion dynamics modifies the equation of state of the universe and will modify the prediction of the primordial gravitational waves produced by other sources, not by the axion itself. Okay, so it's really the impact of the axion on the cosmological history, which can really change the spectrum of gravitational waves from cosmic strings or from inflation. That's an important point. So, yeah, let me start again from this plot. As I told you, the standard cosmological history is the following. You have inflation and followed by a long radiation era. Okay, and as a result, these gravitational waves from inflation, they have a nearly flat spectrum. Okay. So now what I want to stress is that if I modify this cosmological history and inside the standard radiation era, I now have a period of matter domination followed by Keynesian. This will completely modify my gravitational wave spectrum from inflation by enhancing it in this way. So that's what essentially I want to stress. And you see now that gravitational waves from inflation can become observable almost at LIGO, but clearly at Einstein telescope, for example. And so what I want to stress now is that this blue evolution can be naturally triggered by axion dynamics. But before I get to there, let me explain what is Keynesian. Okay, so Keynesian is just an equation of state omega equal 1, which means that the energy density of the universe is dominated by the kinetic energy of a scalar field. Exactly. So you see here, this is the definition. And so now if you check in the literature, Keynesian has been discussed exclusively until now in the context of inflationary models. So at the end of inflation, your field starts to fast roll essentially, and you have this era, this period of Keynesian. So yeah, what instead I want to stress is that Keynesian can actually happen completely independently of inflation inside the radiation era. So that's the new thing. Until now, Keynesian was exclusively discussed essentially tied to inflation. So for instance, you have inflation here, which ends with a Keynesian era, and then you have standard reheating and radiation. Okay. So in this case, in case you have this Keynesian era following inflation, unfortunately, there is no interesting signatures, and this is what I'm trying to illustrate here with this plot. In fact, so here is the signal, the standard signal from inflation, and this would be the enhancement from the Keynesian era. Okay, you have at the end of inflation. And you see that now the enhancement is really happening at very high frequencies. So this cannot be observed by present experiments. And if you wanted to move this peak to lower frequencies so that it becomes observable by ET, for example, unfortunately, this corresponds to also lowering the inflationary scale. And therefore, as I told you, the inflationary signal in gravitational wave scales like the force power of inflationary scale. So then it's going to decrease the signal. So there is no chance. So this was known, actually, Daniel Figueroa discussed this earlier. Unfortunately, kination following inflation, does not have promising prospects for observing gravitational waves from this era. So this can be summarized again in this plot I'm showing here. The sensitivity of LISA, Einstein telescope, BBO, LIGO to gravitational waves from inflation enhanced by a kination era in the plane reheating temperature and inflationary scale. And so what we stress here is that, okay, the only way to probe this would be to have very high frequency experiments. And so here, assuming the existence of a new experiment at high frequency, let's say sensitive at 10 megahertz, with such sensitivity, then you would be able to probe it. Okay, so that's the conclusion for, let's say, traditional kination. And now I want to move to this short kination era, and let's say low scale, independent from inflation, that is triggered instead by axion physics, and which can lead to very beautiful signals of gravitational waves at the future observatories. So what triggers a kination era? And the answer is a spinning axion. So here, the idea is, as I said at the very beginning, to give up on the usual assumption that the axion starts its dynamics at rest, but instead it acquires some velocity. And the simple way to think about this is this model. So now you have to consider the full complex scalar field. So the axion is a pseudo-Nambu-Goldstone boson. And one usually, when discussing the axion cosmology, just forget about the radial mode of the complex scalar field. We assume, okay, this radial mode is essentially at the bottom of the potential, of the Peccei-Quinn potential, and nothing interesting happens. And you only consider the axion. So instead, I want to consider the interplate dynamics between the radial mode and the angular mode of the complex scalar field. Okay, so you have this phi. So this phi here is a radial mode, theta is my axion field. And instead of starting at the origin, so usually you start at the origin of the Peccei-Quinn potential and you field roll at the minimum here. So this is very early on before the axion potential develops, right? But instead of starting at the origin, I'm starting here at very large VEV, larger than FA. Okay, so FA is the usual scale at which my U1 symmetry is spontaneously broken. Okay, you see it here. But initially I start at phi larger than FA, okay, below M Planck or close to M Planck, but larger than FA. And this is, okay, there are plenty of models which motivate this. In particular, you can have a Hubble-induced mass term, which drives the field initially to large values here of your potential. So the idea that you start here, and then when the mass of your radial mode becomes larger than Hubble expansion, the field starts moving, okay? And as soon as it starts moving, it will kick the axion if there is some source of explicit breaking, so some higher dimensional operators which break your U1 symmetry, then the motion of the radial mode will automatically induce a kick to the axion. And so the axion will start spinning around, and eventually the phi field reaches FA, and you have a spinning axion which will induce a kination era. That's the idea. So here I summarize the ingredients for a successful kination era. So you have a U1 symmetric potential. which has to be essentially nearly quadratic for this whole story to work. You have a spontaneous symmetry breaking minimum. You start initially with a large VEV for the Pechequin field. You have some explicit U1 breaking term, just to be sure that you give a kick to the axion, because otherwise the U1 symmetry prevents the axion to get a kick. So even when phi starts rolling, but the axion would not acquire velocity if there is no U1 breaking term. Okay, and then eventually you have to make sure that you damp the motion of the radial mode, because otherwise you will still have a matter era, you will not have a kination era. So you need to make sure that there is no energy left into radial motion. So these are the ingredients. Okay, and here is what happens precisely from this dynamic. So initially, so you have your standard inflation era, your standard reheating, you are in a radiation dominated era, and you have your Pechequin scalar field here, which at some point starts moving, and this leads to some matter era initially. Okay, so this is the dynamics here before you reach the bottom of the potential is actually leading to a matter era. So you are now dominated by, at some point, the energy in the scalar field dominates over radiation, and you really have a matter dominated era. Then the field reaches the bottom of the potential, which is when kination will start. And kination will not last very long, it will last only a few e-folds, because eventually the radiation takes over again. Okay, so you see inside the radiation era, you have this period of matter followed by kination, and which is triggered by a scalar field which has nothing to do with inflation. Okay, so the energy scale of kination is given by the velocity here of the axion field and Fa. And the duration of kination, which you characterize in terms of this number of e-folds of kination, is just the ratio of the scale factor of the universe at the beginning and at the end here of this kination era. And it turns out that there is a relation to the duration of the matter era. There is just a factor 2. You find that these are related. And we are just talking here about a few e-folds. It's not lasting very long. But still, even a few e-folds can have very quite important consequences for observations. So this is just to summarize what I've said here, how you get this. Yeah, I didn't say earlier, a kination era corresponds to the energy density redshifting as a⁻⁻⁶. Okay, good. Are there any questions at this stage? Okay. So let me, are you here? Oops.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so let me continue. Yes, so now the main observational aspects, consequence of this kination era is a peak in the gravitational wave background. And this can be understood from the fact that the gravitational wave signal is kind of tracking the total energy density of the universe, whether these are gravitational waves from inflation or from cosmic strings. The energy in gravitational waves, if you want, is kind of proportional to the total energy density. So if you have this type of cosmological history, you will also have an enhancement in the gravitational wave energy density. Okay. So the peak frequency here corresponds to this transition between the matter era and the kination era. So you can derive the precise formula, the precise formula here for the peak frequency. And you see it's proportional to this kination energy scale. And it's also, it also depends on the duration of kination. And here is the formula for the value of the amplitude at the peak. So here is a spectrum you typically get from this story. Here is omega gravitational waves versus frequency. And you see now, instead of this flat, this is really gravitational waves from inflation. Instead of this flat horizontal background, you now get this large enhancement. And the position of the peak here is controlled by the energy scale of kination and its duration. Okay, so I'm showing you here on the right what are the prospects for the future experiments, mainly LISA, ET, and BBO, to probe such an era. And now there are only two parameters, the kination scale and the duration of kination. And you see here, LISA can probe, we are talking about kination duration of a few eFolds, 4, 5, 6 eFolds, up to essentially 12. Because beyond 12, you have a bound actually, because the signal is so amplified that you really violate the bounds from an effective, because gravitational waves behave like radiation, right? So you would really constrain the duration of kination here from BBN. And so this is very completely model independent. So this plot is completely model independent. And now, okay, let's talk about QCD axion, our well-motivated and favorite axion. In the case of the QCD axion, unfortunately, the peak now, you see, is at very high frequencies. And so I'm going to come back to this. This is for the conventional QCD axion. Of course, if you change the relation now between the mass and FA, there is a way to bring this peak towards lower frequency. And this is what is illustrated by these lines. And this is, I'm referring here to the models by Belen that she had earlier this year with Andreas Rindvall and Pablo Quiles, where they consider some non-standard QCD axion. And in this case, they would become, I mean, the signals would become observable. Okay, so let me discuss a little bit more axion dark matter in this story, because I've been talking about so far, you see, the signal does not depend on the axion mass. All the story I talked about only depends on the mass of the radial mode. This is really the crucial aspect here. And the axion mass only comes when you want to get the correct dark matter abundance. But for the kination era, it does not play any role. So let me discuss axion dark matter in general. And this is in the plane axion mass 1/FA. So you've seen this type of plots many times. There is a lot of excitement about searches for ALP axion-like particles. And you see here all the constraints in green and orange. And so the color code is that for orange, you do not need to assume that axion is dark matter. And then if it's green, you have an extra assumption that axion is dark matter. Okay, so you see that there are plenty of ways to probe the axion, plenty of constraints from astrophysics. And there are all these lines, which are the sensitivity lines of future experiments. Now, if you ask in this plane, which axions can be dark matter, you have to be on this pink line. So on this line, you have the correct abundance of dark matter, assuming the standard misalignment mechanism. And if you are above this line, you don't have enough dark matter. So this is a bit unfortunate because we have all these experiments which would be sensitive to the axions, and unfortunately they are not, okay, those axions cannot be dark matter. The yellow line here corresponds to the QCD axion line. And what I would like to stress now is that all this white region above the pink line can actually be motivated to be a region where the axion can be dark matter. which would be produced now in a different way. And the recipe here is to switch on an initial velocity for the axon. So the main claim, and so this is some work that we are completing now, is that in all this region, you can have the axon to have the correct dark matter abundance. Yes, so just again to stress, so the usual story is that you start at the origin, then eventually you have Peccei-Quinn symmetry breaking, and then your field, the radial mode is frozen here, and you just consider the axon dynamics. And the alternative I've been discussing is that you actually start at large values above FA, and eventually you end up here. And in this case, there is this very interesting dynamics between the radial mode and the angular mode of the Peccei-Quinn field. Okay, and so as I told you, this radial mode can give a kick to the axon, and this early kick will change the standard misalignment mechanism, because now the field having a large velocity, this will delay the time when it's trapped in the minimum and when it starts oscillating. So this was discussed already 2 years ago by Ko, Harigaya, and Hall, and then there is a series of papers afterwards. This is a so-called kinetic misalignment mechanism. And so it's very interesting. You have now a possibility to get the correct relic abundance for dark matter in this whole region above my pink line that I showed earlier. Okay, and so now I want to make the link between axon dark matter and gravitational wave signals I've been discussing earlier. And this is summarized in this plot, where I again show the plane axon mass and 1/FA. Okay, so I'm showing you regions, so the regions where you can have a gravitational wave signal. And to the left of these lines, you have a signal which can be probed by, so for instance, you look at the blue region here, this is a LIGO constraints. And now if you are on in this bound, so between, so here's this LIGO, next run or future sensitivity, you would have the possibility to probe this region. LISA is sensitive to this whole region to the left of the green line, Einstein telescope to the left of this line, Cosmic Explorer BBO. So there is a nice complementarity here where you see you can have an extra probe of axion dark matter using gravitational waves in those scenarios where the axion acquires an initial velocity. And this is the usual line where you get the correct relic abundance to standard misalignment. And above this line, you have what we call this kinetic misalignment mechanism. Okay, so that's the idea here. I would like to come back to the QCD axion to explain why for the QCD axion, the signal would be to high frequency. So in this sense, we are motivating high frequency experiments if one wants to probe the gravitational waves from a spinning QCD axion. So essentially what we've done is to relate the signal in gravitational waves, okay, omega peak if you want, to omega dark matter. So the energy density in ALP dark matter is related to the initial velocity of the axion. So you have essentially what we call the yield here. So this is the number density of axion over the entropy, and it's related to this quantity here. So Fa squared theta dot. And so the Peccei-Quinn charge in the spinning axion transfers to the axion number density via this kinetic misalignment mechanism. And so you can actually relate the frequency, the peak frequency of the gravitational wave signal to omega dark matter in the axion, the kination energy scale, the mass of the axion, and Fa. And so here, this shows you this line where the axion has the correct, the QCD axion has the correct dark matter density. So this is this orange line here. And you see it's really, unfortunately, outside of the sensitivity range of planned experiments. So that's the main statement, that you would need high frequency experiments to probe the spinning, the QCD action. Okay. So far I have discussed the enhancement in inflationary gravitational waves. Okay. And now I would like to move to other primordial gravitational waves. I introduced them at the beginning of this talk. And now I want to show you the impact of this kination era, of this spinning action on the gravitational waves from cosmic strings. Okay, so if you remember this standard signal from cosmic strings, from standard cosmology, so radiation era, is the black prediction. Okay. And now, because of this kination, intermediate kination era, you enhance quite significantly the signal, and this is shown here in those three cases, 3 benchmark points. And you see here, so you have these 3 cases, which you can read here on this plot. They correspond to only like 2 E-folds, 4 E-folds, 6 E-folds of kination. And this has still a very important impact on the spectrum. Yeah, and so you see, you could see this, excuse me, you could see this at LISA or ET, and you would get a very big peak here. So we relate this peak frequency, I'm sorry, we relate this peak frequency to, again, the energy scale of kination and to the duration of kination. So you can do this for local cosmic strings. So whether the U1 that you break is local, but you can do the same for global cosmic strings. Let me, I think, yes, here, global cosmic strings. So you get a slightly different spectrum in this case, and you have a different relation now for the peak frequency, but the idea is essentially the same. Okay. So you have to add up the signals, right? So we all believe in inflation. So you have the signal from inflation. So if you consider the signal from cosmic strings, you have to add also the signal from inflation. So when you do that, you actually have a 2-peak structure for the spectrum. You will have a peak due to inflation, and you will have a peak due to cosmic strings. So this is now the type of signal that you would get, which could be probed by different types of experiments, depending on the frequency they are sensitive to. So here is an example where you have a kination era happening at the TeV scale, on here at 10 to the 8 GeV for different duration of kination. And this is a typical, let me explain this. So for those familiar with cosmic strings, so mu is just the string tension. So this is essentially the square of the energy scale at which you break the U1 symmetry responsible for the formation of the string network. And G is just a Newton constant. Okay, so the constraint on G mu nowadays from PTA experiments is 10 to the minus 11. So G mu has to be smaller than that. And you see here that even for G mu as low as this, you would get really a very large signal. Yeah, so this is another example of a spectrum where now you combine inflation with global cosmic strings. Okay. So I think in the remaining time, let me first summarize what I've just said here. So this kination period is a time when the energy density of the universe is dominated by a scalar field with large kinetic energy. And the main effect is that this amplifies the primordial, long-lasting sources of gravitational waves. Therefore, gravitational waves from inflation and from cosmic strings. Now, how do you motivate this kination era? So you cannot get this by just assuming some arbitrary scalar field dynamics. You need very specific dynamics, and it turns out that spinning action is exactly leading to this possibility. And this is well motivated by this interplay dynamics between the radial and angular mode of a complex scalar field. Now you can relate the peak gravitational waves to this kination energy scale, and so Lisa would be sensitive again to this 10 TeV, 100 TeV scale, while ET is rather sensitive to 10 to the 6 to 10 to the 9 GeV. And you can relate this gravitational wave amplitude to the duration of kination, while the peak frequency is also sensitive to the kination energy scale. And so what I have discussed is very general, and it applies to any ALP, okay? And in particular to the QCD axion, but for the QCD axion, as soon as you impose the correct dark matter abundance, you will find that the signal can only be seen by ultra-high frequency gravitational wave detectors. Okay. This is a summary. Okay, when you just scan over the whole parameter space, you can combine your result in this way, where here on the x-axis I show the Peccei-Quinn scale, if you want, FA, and here the energy scale of kination. And so now, depending on the UV completion, so far I have only discussed one type of UV completion, which is this model where this complex scalar field, dynamics like you have in Affleck-Dyn baryogenesis, for example. Here is typically the region that you can probe with gravitational wave experiments, the typical values of FA and kination energy scale that you get. We are exploring other models, how to give a kick to the axion that I'm not going to discuss here, which would correspond to, which would populate a different region of parameter space. So that's, if you want, one way to summarize the link between, the gravitational wave probes and the particle physics parameters. So one specific example. So this model I discussed earlier, you can actually specifically constrain your particle physics parameters with gravitational waves. So you can constrain FA, and you can constrain MR, where MR is the mass of the radial mode of your complex scalar field. Okay, so here we are really studying in details the constraints on this radial mode mass and FA from gravitational waves. And you see there are many interesting regions that can be probed. I'm not going to explain all the lines here, but we see the contours of the duration of kination, and the different black lines corresponds to different contours for the dark matter abundance. Okay, so I don't have much time, so just in a few minutes, I wanted to come back to, you could forget about gravitational waves now for a few minutes and just consider the impact of this initial velocity of the axion on axion dark matter in general. Let me skip this. So let's look again at this plot where we have this famous MA 1/FA plane. So it's very general. The constraints on a general ALP, okay, assuming some type of coupling and relating FA to the photon coupling of the axion. Here is a parameter space. And as I told you, we have many planned experiments which will try to improve on constraining this, improve the constraints. And that's another way to show this. And now I want to come back to this question. Which of these axions can be dark matter? I already told you we can go beyond this misalignment mechanism and now consider the effect of an initial velocity for the axion. And I want to show you what will happen. So this is standard misalignment line here. And assuming a large theta initial to be of order 1. You can also populate the large FA region by assuming a small angle theta I, right? So this is what this line are showing. You can always tune the initial position of your axion field such that you can have a large FA value and the correct dark matter abundance. So this is well known. And now what I've been stressing today is the effect of an initial velocity. And so I want to show you now the effect here, exactly. So the effect of this kinetic misalignment, now you are populating this region. I told you before I could populate the whole white region. So why do I show only this band? Well, what happens is that actually you populate the whole region. So everywhere in this plane, every single point can have the correct relic abundance of dark matter. But one has to be careful that there are interesting things happening here. Kinetic misalignment, strictly speaking, only applies in this band. And above this, you have what we call fragmentation. You can no longer talk about the homogeneous field for the axion. So just a zero mode. What will happen is that your axion will fragment and you will produce the higher modes of your axion field. So the relic abundance, if you want the relic abundance prediction, is not really changed. I mean, it's more or less the same as what you would predict from kinetic misalignment. But conceptually, what happens is different. You cannot just talk about the homogeneous zero mode. You really have fragmented completely your axion field. And so you have a very interesting now momentum distribution for your axion particles, which are produced actually hot. So they are produced hot, and then they cool down, and eventually you get cold dark matter. But then there will be one important implication for observations, is that you may form axion mini clusters, because now you have you have this momentum distribution for the axion, and this can lead to very interesting new observations in terms of compact structures. So this is what we are doing now, and I wanted to stress that above this line here, your field is going to be fragmented. So I think I will end with this. So this is some work that we are essentially finishing now and working the predictions for axion mini clusters in this case. Okay, and maybe let me stress something related maybe to Belen's question earlier. So you know the QCD axion is on this yellow line here. And so this corresponds to the axion field being trapped. So initially it has a large velocity and it overshoots the barrier. Okay, but at some point it will be trapped when the kinetic energy becomes small enough. And these T star are exactly the temperature at which this happens. So this is a QCD axion line. And now if you want to populate this region with ALP dark matter, this would correspond to trapping temperature quite low. And when you are in this region, these are the contours of lambda B. So the confinement scale for the ALP potential. So you see now this is a very low scale of confinement, right? So when you are in this region, this corresponds to hidden sectors, which produce a mass for the axion from essentially very low lambda B scale. Okay, so I guess I will stop here. I'm open for questions. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, Geraldine. So now it's time for questions. Please raise your hands. Okay, Lucas.
Yes, hello. Thank you for your very interesting talk. So I was wondering, you showed at the beginning that if kination happens right after inflation, the peak of the gravitational wave spectrum is at too high frequencies, or you need the energy scale of inflation to be very low, and therefore the tensor to scalar ratio to be very small. And anyway, you cannot observe this. But doing this, you assume that there is this standard relation, right, between the tensor scalar ratio and the energy scale of inflation. But I guess that as soon as you begin to play with axions, you can also have couplings to gauge fields and this kind of things for which it's not the vacuum contribution, which is the most important one. And that could, I guess, break this degeneracy between the position of the peak and the amplitude of the overall floor signal. Have you discussed this in this?
Yeah, no, totally right. So I've been looking at the very simplest case where I ignore the interactions of the inflaton with, well, any coupling. So we would, it would be interesting to now look at the impact of this on the gravitational wave background from axion inflation, for example, where you have an enhancement, right, at higher frequencies. And I guess, yeah, there will be an effect here, but no, we have not looked at this. Yeah.
Okay. I actually have other questions, but I will let the other one ask first.
Okay. I wanted to ask you, Geraldine, before we move the questions. So you said that in order to get an initial velocity, you need an explicit U1 braking. Did I understand correctly?
Yes.
So how does this affect the axion properties?
Okay, so essentially
does this affect it in some way?
So you have large braking of U1 initially, but only when the wave of this field is large. So when the wave is larger than FA. As soon as it reaches FA, this higher dimensional, the effect of this higher dimensional operators is suppressed.
Okay, so you don't affect the axion mass or anything like that. Okay.
Well, yeah, so you affect the axion mass very much at early times, but but then later, as soon as you reach FA, as soon as you are here, the effect of this operator is negligible.
Okay. We have another question, I think, by Guillermo.
Yes. So Geraldine, let me see if I understood correctly. It seems that from some of your slides that the reason why you get this enhancement is not really the kination phase itself, but the matter era that precedes it, right?
Well, if you only had a matter era, you would not have any enhancement actually. So you see, to have a kination era, you need a matter era first. Otherwise, you can never have a kination era just due to the scaling of the energy density. So yeah, I mean, when I talk about kination, it's always coupled scenario where matter plus kination, indeed. It's just that if you want to have kination inside radiation era, you necessarily need the matter era first.
Okay, but let's suppose I have a way of having a matter era that follows by radiation, not kination. Would I also get a large enhancement in that case?
Okay, so you would have now a standard model radiation, matter, and radiation, right?
Yeah.
No. Okay, it's true that maybe it may be confusing from this plot, but you will not have the enhancement is really linked to the fact that you have this scaling here.
Matter era will decrease the gravitational wave spectrum.
Yeah, no, I mean, just, if you have only matter era, you suppress the gravitational wave signal. But no, I understand that you get confused by this plot here, but
I must say
in this case for sure.
I was also a bit confused by that because when you said kination, the way I understood it was that you want to dilute the energy density of the universe faster than the one in gravitational waves in order to enhance it, to enhance the gravitational waves as compared to the energy budget of the universe.
Yeah, I mean, so maybe one other way to see this is from the very first plot I showed. And one way to see this is, when you have a kination era, it's like you have a smaller A0. So like you redshift less. I mean, that's maybe one way to see it compared to the standard case, right?
Okay. Thank you.
So yeah, you could see it from this plot where the enhancement comes from. Like you have a smaller N0 today from a kination era compared to the standard case. And on the other hand, here you have a larger N0 from a matter era. So from a matter era, you get a suppression of the signal compared to the standard case.
All right.
I have another question, Geraldine. I think it's a bit dumb, but so you talked about the effect on a signal from inflation, on a signal from cosmic strings. You didn't talk about the effect on a signal from phase transitions because it's a short-lived thing and it will not do anything, or does it amplify it?
We looked at it, and okay, in this case, the effect is much less spectacular, but there is an effect. So we actually have a section in our long paper where we discuss the effect of the kination or matter plus kination era on the signal from a phase transition, and there is an effect on the IR slope. Exactly. But there is no enhancement. So you change the shape of the spectrum at low frequencies, but there is no enhancement of the signal. So that's why I didn't talk about it in this talk, because it's much less spectacular, but in principle, there is a subtle effect.
Okay, thanks. Well, if there are no more questions, I think we can stop here. Thanks again a lot, Geraldine, for this talk and for coming to the Christmas workshop. And we reconvene for the next talk in half hour.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye, Geraldine.
Geraldine. Ciao, ciao.
Take care.
Yeah.
Happy New Year.
Yeah.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Enjoy the holidays.